but as I said, which will kind of help us transition to our next topic, is that something like this, hopefully we'll be able to promote sharing of the gospel, and which is perfect for a week like this week because it is known in the Christian circles as Passion Week, which started from Sunday, which was Palm Sunday, and leads up into Good Friday and Easter. And it's pretty much like this is the kind of where we celebrate the Jesus's last week before he was crucified on the cross. And it's just, I think that this is one of those like really important weeks in the Christian calendar that I think helps us to remember why we're Christians, and just seeing the remembering the magnitude of what was done for us. I know this is like to me, like this is my favorite time of the year, and I mean every Sunday is technically a celebration of the resurrection, as it should be, but this week in particular is kind of a remembrance and celebration of everything that took place, that happened. Do you have any particular like thoughts or anything concerning like Passion Week? Is there anything that you like to do or anything like that, Andy?
Not specifically. What is it? I just kind of do the typical thing. Just going, doing Good Friday service, going to Easter, service as well. Although seeing as you're a Bible study, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong. But I heard that that the Gospels spend a certain I can forget what percentage. Like I think more than a quarter of the Gospels focus on this week. Yeah, and I thought, when I heard that, I found out that was pretty significant. Because you would think like, focus, on the teaching, or kind of, just on Jesus' ministry or his healings or things like that. But no, like, the Gospels, they all focus the majority of their chapters, on this week. And I think that shouldn't surprise anybody, because it's the most significant and influential thing that happened in human history.
Yeah. Well, and there was a lot that Jesus did during this week. Kind of knowing, because he knew what was going to happen. But then, I've heard a couple of different arguments concerning what Palm Sunday is. There was a time where point where Jesus was entering into Jerusalem, and this was the time of
the triumphal entry.
All the Jews coming in for the Passover celebration. A lot of Jews traveled from, all around where they were from, and would travel to the temple in Jerusalem. It's been done for many years, and there was a lot of buzz around Jesus and the Messiah and all that.
This was the height of Jesus's, I guess, fame or popularity. They got Jesus, or the apostles were instructed to, but they got him a donkey to ride in on. People tore off palm branches and lay them down or lay down their cloaks for kind of his procession, kind of like a king.
Right. Well, and that was because I think this is what many of what the apostles were thinking that he was, and I think a lot of the people that were celebrating him is like they thought, because a lot of people thought that he was going to be the king that was going to come and overthrow Rome and restore the kingdom of Israel, which is partly true in a sense. I mean that comes a little bit later on, but at this time that was not what Jesus was meant to do. And but
Mm-hmm.
that was the thought process with many Jews at the time, is that he was going to overthrow Rome and restore the kingdom of Israel. And a lot of people think that those same people who were celebrating Christ were the same ones that they ended up turning on him, just a few days later. I'm maybe one of in the minority that I don't think that was the case, because for that to have happened it seems a little schizophrenic in that case, just because all the happenings that were going on with Judas's betrayal and how everything was kind of done under the cloak of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, where you had like the temple leadership that was kind of condemning him, putting him on trial and all that stuff. It all happened under the cover of darkness. So these same people that were celebrating him just days before, I don't think that they were the same people, because all that stuff was done under the cover of darkness, and the crowd that was there was more of this, pro. They were probably part of the. I think it was another crowd that did not want him, or that they thought he was, something else. But I don't know. It's that
So
I
this
might
might
be
have
in the
been the
minority.
first example of astroturfing.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
because again, it could have been the Pharisees or the Sanhedrin, and anyone in like the ruling class, it's getting people to come and sneer and jeer at Jesus.
Yeah, because I mean the ones that didn't really want him were, a majority of them were like, yeah, the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, all kind of the Jewish royalty in a lot of sense. And I'm sure you had some of the Pharisees in there too, but it was that crowd that was constantly like, trying to, trip him up with these, questions and ideas, and it's like, and that he would, in a sense, kind of humiliate them.
Right,
And
it's
yeah, they
like
were,
he would just like own them
yeah,
because
it's kind of,
like the whole like, oh, is it right or moral to pay taxes to the Romans? And then he goes, it's like whose face is on this coin? It's like Caesar's. Like, well, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and give to God what's God's.
well, the other thing
I
that
mean, being God, himself, he just expertly is able to, dodge those booby traps that the elites set for him.
and you had in a couple cases too, so throughout the Gospels, there was um Jesus, when he would have his famous "I am" sayings.
Mm-hmm.
The wording there is the same as when Moses encountered God at the burning bush.
That's
"I am
correct.
who I am."
Mm-hmm.
It's the same. It's the same wording, although
Right.
it's in
Yeah. It's
Greek.
just
But
yeah, slightly different. Moses asks, when he's commissioned by God to go back into Egypt and to confront Pharaoh. He says, like, "Oh, who should I say has sent me?" And then in the whole burning bush scene, it says, I am, I am who I am, or I am, or
yeah, and so that's essentially what Jesus is saying. So you have the teachers who were blinded to who he was, and it's like, and you'd have, I mean, they were furious with him because how dare you, take on, because they knew what he was saying. It's like he was essentially, that wording was saying that I'm God, and so there was people who couldn't see him for who he was, rightfully pissed off. I would think, if you're blinded to that stuff, yeah, if that's blasphemy. Then you have the people like the Sadducees, who those were the guys that were in kind of their whole thing revolved around the temple. They were the guys that were in charge of like all like the money changers and all that stuff. That's how they were making their money. And when Jesus overthrew like the money changers, and it's like these people are stopping people from coming to worship as they should, and so they were pissed off at him, and
Right, because
they were all looking.
they were getting a, they're like the vendors or whatever, they were giving a cut to Sadducees.
Yeah, and
Right, and I
so
mean,
they
it's
were.
not as though Jesus was mad that there were vendors, because or more typically the vendors would be outside of the temple um, walls, and they'd be selling like the doves and the sacrifice things outside on the street on the way into uh, the temple, and also the temple, like the courtyard area that that they had set up in was reserved for people to come and worship, and I think particularly specifically those who were not Jewish.
Yeah, it was set up in the court of the Gentiles, is where all that stuff was
Right.
set up.
And so yeah, it was just like, and so like, because they set up there, they were then hindering people to come from coming and worshiping.
And then you have Judas, who he was Jesus's, he was kind of the guy that was taking in all like this, like the donations and all that stuff. And
Mhm.
there was rumor that he was actually like potentially like siphoning off money. He was embezzling money for one. And
Oh.
then the other thing too is that there was a time where he started to realize that that like many of the others, like he saw that, oh, he's not going to overthrow the Romans. Like he was actually the first one to realize like that not that Jesus was like a fake, but it was like he's not doing what we're all thinking he's going to be doing. It's something
Right.
else at
Judas
hand.
thought Jesus was more of a political revolutionary,
Well,
and he was
they all did. In a case, I think a lot of them did, and Judas was the first to realize that like that's not what's happening, and that's why he ended up looking to betray Jesus. And it's like, well, I'm going to make some money off of this because I know that they are looking for an opening. And yeah, that was how it all got started. But it was, and then you have like the interesting theological wrestling of, and this goes to like the whole free will predestination thing. It's like, well, Jesus had to die for our benefit. He was uh that was kind of like what God knew had to happen. So was it necessary that like Judas was chosen by God to be the betrayer, or is it just Judas based off of his own
right. That was,
failings
or
and
yeah,
personality?
was it God that chose Judas for the role, or was he just always meant to be the betrayer?
Yeah, and I mean that gets into some like sticky theological territory too. But it's um, and I actually think that as it goes past, because Judas ends up, feels he has tremendous guilt over what he did, and he ends up obviously like throwing the blood money back at them. He rejects it, and then he ends up committing suicide. Um, And the funny thing is, you have after the after the ascension, after Jesus ascends into heaven, they have a time where they pray to replace Judas as the one of the apostles. They have Matthias, but you never hear about Matthias again. Whereas Paul was actually ended up being technically I think the replacement to Judas, because he, as being a guy who
Well,
obviously he
it
wrote
was first Stephen, correct? They first decided that it was Stephen, and then he was martyred, and then and
no,
then
because the calling of Matthias was happened before Stephen was martyred. Because but
right,
I think
it was
that
between Stephen and somebody else, and then Stephen goes and he gets martyred, and then which leaves the spot open again. No, or
no
am
no
I
no 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 no
remembering it wrong?
Stephen no you're well, he was one of the mini disciples. He was not the Stephen that was martyred. I don't think was one of the 12. I believe he was. I could be wrong about that. It's been a while since I've read Acts, actually. But no, what I'm saying is with Matthias was the one that was chosen as the 12th, the
Yeah,
replacement. Well, we kind of never hear about him again. But we have Paul, who was, in a sense, kind of like a Judas, who was, killing all these, Christians, being kind of with a lot of zeal, and then was encountered the resurrected Christ and ended up becoming arguably the greatest of the apostles, and obviously wrote nearly half the
right.
Old
Yeah,
Testament.
all the epistles. Here's a nifty hypothetical. If Judas didn't kill himself, do you think Jesus would have redeemed him
Yeah,
after the 3 days?
absolutely. I
Yeah,
mean,
I
the
mean,
thing is,
I would believe that as well.
because of course, I think Jesus knew exactly, what, because if you think about it, he chose Judas, probably knowing exactly what Judas was going to do, several years down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and same as he chose Peter, knowing Peter was going to betray him, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think but the whole point is, if you, yeah, they failed as as his followers and all that stuff, but technically it's kind of it points to a bigger picture, is that we've all failed God in that way. We've all betrayed him. We've all kind of, in a sense, spat in his face and done all this stuff. Yet he still went to the cross and willingly died for on the cross for all of us, all the
Mm-hmm.
past sins, all the future, all the present sins, all the future sins. That's what he went on the cross for,
Right. For all
and
eternity,
for
for
all
all
eternity.
eternity, His blood covers us.
And so I think that, yeah, of course he would have redeemed Judas, and I think had Judas not killed himself, we would be talking. I believe that we would be reading a lot of Judas's work. Judas would have written half the New Testament. I think he would have been the most zealous guy.
Yeah,
For
the most zealot
Christ.
apostle of the
Yeah,
12.
I think that would be what would happen.
Right. Yeah, and I guess trying to follow up. So yeah, I think that God, I think God had to pick Paul because he was doing because again he was doing such heinous things that against Christians, that his redemption would have I think would have his Paul's redemption um, would have made the right impact uh, for the time. And I think it was almost kind of like a plan B because Judas killed himself. and that if
Right.
and if he didn't kill himself and he was and Jesus did redeem him after his resurrection, then I think we'd have books written by Judas Iscariot, the most zealot of the most zealous of the 12 apostles.
Yeah, and it's just
And I
I
think
think it's an interesting thought experiment at least.
right.
And
Yeah,
but
but I
when it
think
comes to like
God knew that there needed to be something that like to that level where Judas betrays God, betrays Jesus, betrays God essentially. But then because of his divine his infinite and divine grace, he forgives Judas, and he goes for the even more fervently spreading the gospel. But because I think maybe again kind of doing like the hypotheticals, maybe that was the plan all along. But Jesus, Judas took it into his own hands, and he just couldn't live with what he did, and he killed himself. And God kind of had to improvise.
well
Not
that was like
not literally, because God knows everything, so nothing is really out of his plan.
right. But it was one of those things where because in all the apostles pretty much like kind of went back to like, well, I guess that's that, and they kind of went back home and did their own thing
Right.
until they encountered the resurrected Christ, and it's like, oh crap, and he restored them and they were never the same again. And I
Mm-hmm.
guarantee that would have happened with Judas. um
Agreed.
but and that also makes me wonder too, like would Judas be, would we meet him in heaven? That's an interesting thought too. And that's something that we can never truly know because
Mm-hmm.
we don't know Judas's heart, or and that whole like time period is kind of interesting with like, because you're kind of in between the Old and New Testament, and what it took to be a believer at the time is kind of a interesting thought experiment too.
Hmm.
um, and
Yeah. I mean, maybe
I
we
don't
could
know.
save it.
It's
Maybe
just
we can save it for
another
different
time.
different nocturnal transmissions or different podcasts.
Yeah, but I'm gonna say one last thing before we kind of move on to the movie review, is that the importance of this week. It really doesn't matter what you've done, where you come from, who you are. Uh, the gospel message is one for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's not about like how smart you are, or how many good things you do, how many bad things you've done. Doesn't matter, if you're currently in kind of a rough situation, and it's also not a magical formula where everything's going to be hunky dory after you accept the gospel. But it's like the gospel is for every person, every man, every woman, every Jew, every Greek. Doesn't matter who. Um, that Christ died on that cross for you, and he rose again so that we could have eternal life. And yeah, I encourage you to read the Gospels and to kind of see for yourself. And yeah, I hope we pray for you, and we hope that you accept the gospel. And even if you don't accept it, we'd still love to talk to you. So you go ahead and comment and do all that good stuff, afterwards.
Yeah, you dirty heathens.
Yeah.